And Maina is the National Coordinator at the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. Good morning, Anne.
Morning, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Welcome
Nice
to
to be
Kenya's
here.
biggest conversation.
Thank you.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Thank
Before we go into the whole thing of why you're here, the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. What is it about?
Thank you very much. The Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya is a network of 60 member organizations working in 28 counties in Kenya. They include faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, CBOs, NGOs, all with the aim of keeping Kenyans aware and alert about many of the issues. We talk mostly about biodiversity and biosafety issues. We have been very loud in the GMO issue. We say no to GMO. Before we were registered, we used to be called the Kenya Biodiversity Coalition, which was a loose coalition. Then we decided, let's get registered and get ourselves talking. We have been in existence from as far back as 2004, where we have been raising concerns about a lot of the false solutions being pushed, like GMOs, biofuels, and others.
So you're also against biofuels?
Yes, if you remember some few years back, there was a big push to have biofuels such as canola and what was it called? Canola, and even turning maize into a biofuel. And we raised a lot of concerns because the people in the drier parts of the country were being told you can grow this castor in the drier parts of the country, it will do well, but it really needs a lot of water. Then for maize is a food security crop. There's no way we can make it a biofuel. But I think even the issue died naturally because when they tried it, it never worked out.
So people were just not able to produce it to some commercial level?
Yes, especially in the drier parts. Because the time there, it was like the Ukambani region, which is dry.
Oh, yeah.
This is the new cash
castor.
crop.
There was a different kind of a seed that was...
It was called, is it castor? I'm trying to remember. Even castor.
Yeah, there was
seed.
castor and there was another one.
Yes. And they were being told this is the new cash crop for Ukambani and the drier parts of the country. But they tried it, it never worked. It really needs a lot of water and nutrients to grow well.
So why are you against it?
Because there was a big push to stop growing of the, if you grow the maize, use it as a biofuel, but also the effects on the environment was going to be almost like what you see in the Baringo part of the country with the matenge. You remember the matenge?
Yes.
Yes, that was going to be an effect in that region. And so we questioned that a lot.
Okay. What's the general understanding of what GMO is? Genetically modified organisms. What is the general understanding? Yesterday we read a very interesting article about how, the chicken that we're going to be eating for Christmas can be grown in a lab. The flesh of the meat. So what's the understanding of what GMO is? People have been up in arms. It causes cancer. It causes all sorts of things. Why should we grow food? Why should we eat food rather that has not grown naturally, organically? What is it?
Let me start off with biotechnology. You'll hear people confusing biotechnology and genetic engineering. Biotechnology has been in existence from as far back as when our parents or grandparents were there. When you brew Muratina, you're using a form of biotechnology. When you bake bread, is biotechnology. The controversial bit, and one branch of it, is the genetic engineering. And in genetic engineering, you're crossing the species barrier. So like one of the first products that was genetically engineered was scientists wanted to see how they can grow tomatoes in the wet or colder parts of the country. So it was crossed with a fish gene so that it can grow, but it never really worked out. So let's give an example. There are 4 major crops that are genetically engineered and commercialized all over the world. You have maize, you have cotton, you have soya, and you have canola. Mostly for oil. With the maize, we have the BT maize. You can have it as insect resistant, and that's the BT. The variety that wants to be introduced in Kenya is called MON 810. You can also have it as herbicide tolerant. It's not yet in Kenya, but this is the type where you use lots of glyphosate, or commercially known as Roundup, to grow the crop. So some people say it's a way of also conserving the environment because you just spray, kill the weeds, and you keep your maize growing. And then you can have a drought tolerant. That is a type that's also being tested in Kenya. It used to be called water efficient maize for Africa. Now we have Tela maize. And then you can have stacked genes which have insect resistance, Roundup ready, or herbicide tolerant, drought resistance. Even you can have virus resistant. That's like for the cassava.
Okay.
So in Kenya right now, we have BT cotton with the farmers.
Yep.
Maize is, yesterday we were talking with someone from the National Biosafety Authority. They say maize in the next season they are bringing it to the market. And then GMO cassava also, to deal with the cassava brown streaked and cassava mosaic disease. And Kenya is one of the first countries that is moving towards commercialization of GMO cassava. No other country the world over has commercialized that. Yes, those are the main products. If you go to the website of the National Biosafety Authority, they also had an application for a GMO flour called Gypsophila, but they rejected that on some socioeconomic concerns. But it was mostly for export.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is wrong with those things?
GMOs, as I said, it crosses the species barrier. And so, naturally, male and female mate, whether animals or plants, and you produce an offspring. Now, with genetic engineering, you're going to the lab, whether you're using the genetic gun, or different ways, you're crossing that species barrier. And questions have been raised about the interplay of the genes in there after doing that in the laboratory.
What is crossing the species barrier? What does that mean?
Where naturally it's male-female cross, you get an offspring. But when you cross the species barrier, you're crossing a gene from
Male?
No, not necessarily. If it's maize plus BT cotton with the Bacillus thuringiensis, BT, which is found in the soil. If it's cassava, they are crossing it with a different. It normally does not happen. Like let me give an example. A simple example.
Today, there is maize. People are planting maize. All right. So
today, naturally, you plant your maize. So they are male and female, and they cross. There's cross pollination, and you get your maize.
The bees and the birds do their thing.
Yes.
And
get maize.
Even the air helps.
And the
There's
cross-pollination.
and you get your.
And you get your maize.
But with the GMO, that does not happen. It's already done in the laboratory.
Okay.
You understand?
Using a different thing?
Yeah, you can use a gene gun. You can use several things they use in the laboratory.
So instead of using a bird, they use a gene gun.
Yes, they use a gene gun to do that. So you're producing a product that's not naturally occurring.
But it's the same thing.
But you've only used a gun instead of a bird.
A bird.
No,
Instead
it's
of
not.
wind,
It's
you've
not an
used-
easy gun. It is something more complicated. You even hear of gene scissors. It's not like the scissors you hear you're cutting.
But the thing that you're taking from that side to this side is the same thing that the wind would have taken from that side to this side.
But you have crossed the species barrier. It's not that it does not happen naturally. That BT from the soil it crosses with the maize and produces a product.
What is
Okay.
BT?
Bacillus thuringiensis.
What
I'm
is
just
that?
giving the example of BT maize. There's a gene that's picked from the soil, Bacillus thuringiensis. Scientists have done a research and seen this has a toxin that repels the
Insects.
the stalk
Okay.
borer.
Okay.
You put it in the maize so that it can fight the stalk borer.
Okay.
One of the challenges that has been seen, for example, in South Africa, for the particular variety they want to introduce in Kenya, is that apart from the stalk borer, there have been other super pests that have come up. And now, unlike previously where the scientists would say that you don't have to spray as much with the GMO, they're being forced to spray more because of the other pests that have come in, because the science is not very precise.
Okay.
Yes.
Wait, so this thing is interesting. So you're saying that these pests who have come fortified, because that's what happens, they've interacted with whatever they started off with, and so they more or less develop resistance to whatever pesticide you had. So you now have to produce new pesticides.
Like these COVID variants.
Yeah, meaning there's no end to this cycle.
Yes.
But part of the reason why science goes into looking into these things is because what probably existed naturally stops working naturally.
Not really. You see, with maize, let's give an example of the local varieties. If it's Katumani, the major challenge, one of the questions that we ask about the environmental impact is that the smallholder farmer in Kenya has 1 or 2 acres. If you go to the large farms, for example, in the US and Canada, maybe in South Africa, the rule is you have to leave a refuge about 5 meters around your farm and grow your maize if it's GMO maize there so that you avoid cross-pollination to maybe I'm the next farmer and I'm growing organic. But that did not really
is
work
that really
out.
feasible? Is that really
In Kenya,
possible?
it can't with our smallholder farmers. And so we're going to lose our local varieties. And that's why we raise questions about biodiversity. Because if you look at even the issue of climate change, the farmer grows different varieties to be able to see if they can withstand the challenges of climate change. Let me give an example of the hybrids. The hybrids that we have currently, and GMO is a form of a hybrid, but not all hybrids are GMO. But all GMOs are hybrids, because they want to get the best out of them. So the hybrids are not very resilient to the challenges with climate change. But if you look at the other local varieties, for example, the Katumani or others that we find, we're even supporting a lot of our communities to revive them. They are more resilient to some of these challenges of climate change. And climate change has become a big issue. Right now we're having rains in November. We planted in October waiting for rains. The rains have come in November. We're not sure if they're going to be sufficient. And so you want to bring GMOs, which is heavily reliant on toxic pesticides, herbicides, and all that, on fertilizers, and on water. Water is an important aspect. How are we going to manage that? Then the questions that we have raised about issues of the health concerns that have been raised. Some scientists, mostly from Europe, have raised concerns about the safety of these genetically engineered crops. Particularly, the most controversial one has been Gilles Seralini from France. He did his research and did a 2-year study on rats and that's their lifespan, and fed them on pure GMO maize and soya even. And these rats developed tumors, and that raised a lot of concern. The controversy with the Seralini report is that the first journal he published with there were interests from multinational corporations, and this is big trade for them. So they put pressure, and this paper was withdrawn. He repeated his research and published in another journal, and it remains one of the controversial, or one of the studies that have been done. Maybe I give another example of Aspad Pushta. He's a researcher that was in an institute in the UK. He also did a research on GM potatoes that were being developed, trying to establish some safety analysis, but also when they were fed on rats, they developed precancerous cells. And that what did they do to Pushtai? His research team was disbanded. He's lost his job with the university, and you can see them a lot of interest, and that's why we keep on asking, what are the interests here? It's about corporate capture. It's about interests, about profit.
Anne, we've jumped the gun somewhere because
we were learning. We were at the point of learning, and then we've gone somewhere else.
Yes, because now when we start talking about multinationals, yes, multinationals are at the forefront of this. Yes, that is also very true. But the research we speak of, before the research teams were disbanded, the peer review mechanisms, the number of maybe multi-site research projects that deal with the same thing, corroborating these findings, do they exist? Because, yes, at the animal, the stage where you are testing these GMOs on animals, that is what was found. But is that all that was found? What was it that they found that they could argue brought about this cancerous growth in these rats? And when I talk about peer review, and I talk about the comparative research, other research projects on the same subject in other places.
What have they found?
Yes, and what about, when you talk about the GMO, what specific GMO were we speaking about? And what exactly were these rats being fed on? The reason why I ask these questions is because literature on GMO and research, many of them are inconclusive. Certain things are pointed out to, the possibility of harm. But the question that is always lingering, what about human beings and their response to it? It lingers.
Yes.
And when that question is asked, would you say that there's anything conclusive that research has found, that they could say, yes, when it comes to human beings, this is what will happen?
And that's one of the biggest controversies that we've always raised. In 2012, when the ban was put in place, already the Seralini research was out. And one of the questions we've asked our local researchers in Kenya, yesterday we had a big webinar with the Kenyatta University, and we're asking, so Seralini, the ban was there for 10 years. Why haven't we done the product is MON 810 and NK603, and it's what wants to be introduced in Kenya, MON 810. Why haven't you done local research with feeding them, or even clinical studies to give us the effect? If you look at BT maize in the US, is mostly grown for animal feed. Maybe let's say in South Africa, they're eating the pap and the sadza, the ugali there. And you can see a lot of the non-communicable disease challenges that we are seeing there. But in these countries, and in particular the US, it's animal feed. And this is what we want to bring into the country. 10 million duty-free bags.
Why is it on animal feed and not humans?
Because it's not
In
their
America.
staple. In the US, it's not their staple. It's wheat.
Okay.
Even in Europe.
But they eat the meat.
They eat the meat. Also, they eat a bit of maize and cornflakes, things like that.
So is there an effect
On the human livelihoods?
on the human livelihoods from those in America that have actually taken the BT maize?
The research, as Muga says,
Is inconclusive.
isn't conclusive. But also, not many researchers are doing it because the funds are also not there. He who's controlling the research is the big multinationals or the so-called philanthropists who own shares in the multinationals.
Okay. Apart from because I see where the fear is. There's some unknown in that room in there, and so before we approach that room, let's guard ourselves. But then there's this other room where you've said BT, for example, is. You told us it's this toxin from the soil that then is introduced into the maize, and it's supposed to help it become water resistant,
Pest.
pest resistant. And then you say, then after we develop it, we still have to use a lot of pesticides. Why? And it's
Because
pest
of the super pests that
because of the
develop.
new super pests that have developed.
that are coming in.
Okay. The other non-GMO variety, do you still need to use pesticides to control the pests?
Yeah, some farmers still use
So
it.
same. So with GMO, with non-GMO, you'll still use pesticides.
But now we have biopesticides and biofertilizers, which we are working on
But no, in the market.
in the market. They're also in the market.
Sawa.
Yes.
Commercially in the market to a greater extent, what are people using?
Yes, it's a synthetic.
Pesticides?
Yes, it's a pesticide.
Synthetic pesticide. And this will also be synthetic pesticide. Which one is going to use more? The GMO
The
one?
GMO.
The GMO is going to use more pesticide.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
In America, where they're using this BT, and then they grow the corn, they feed the corn on the animals, there are people who still consume corn.
Yes, the
they do.
Mexicans love it.
It's have we seen any anecdotal impact on humans?
Maybe let me speak in South Africa. So maize is their staple.
Yes.
And South Africa, I think 1998 started growing the GMO maize. I haven't seen much research on it, but some scientists have questioned the increasing cases of especially non-communicable diseases, the diabetes, the hypertension. Already you can say even in Kenya is facing that challenge, but the problem is going to be bigger. There have also been some linkages to issues of cancer. But like I said, many of the independent even researchers in Europe face a lot of sidelining and stigmatization because they are going against the grain, and the grain is controlled by the big multinationals.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the voice for GMO is much stronger
Yes,
than the voice against GMO
and well resourced.
and well resourced.
Yes.
Why aren't we getting more people resourcing the voice against GMO?
I don't know. That's a question
In the
that,
world, when it comes to research, there's always counterbalance. If the voice against GMO is so strong, like you're seeing, there's a National Biosafety and Biodiversity Association, and you're not the only ones in the region, in the world. You're so many. Why isn't that you're unable to raise resources to actually conduct a conclusive trial and conduct it in several places?
it's something that we are doing, but it's not very big, because you see, like maybe let me just give an example of how the system is so much closed or entrenched. If you look at, there's been a lot of controversy about the seed laws in Kenya. You remember the issue about farmers can be jailed for having a technology that belongs to
somebody.
It's all linked. They're all linked from a distance, because the reason why our laws were changed is because the money that was used to change these laws is coming from the same multinationals, from industry. So you change the seed law, you finance, because unfortunately our government is not giving enough money to even local research. They're paying for PhD students, they're paying for master students, they're changing the laws, the agriculture laws, they're supporting so many ways. So it's very difficult for me or someone who has a PhD paid for by a certain company to speak against it. And
even if you know the counter to be true,
it's very difficult. We have friends in there who tell me,
even if you know the counter to be true.
But also, Anne,
you see, because that's the thing. Because if you know, if the research, and I think that's the question, if you're convicted by the findings of the research, because this is science here, science will show you something clear. It will not be a maybe if. You'll have your proof, you'll have your trace, you will know this is what the situation is. So that fuels your conviction. Now, if you see something to be true and you know that it could be of potential danger to people, the thought of you remaining silent because your bill has been paid by somebody to study is really scary.
It's scary, but it happens. We have friends in there who will give you the information but tell you, no, and I can't speak against this.
Because
I'm paid by
was
my money is
sponsored.
paid.
Yeah.
I was sponsored, but I'm also employed to do this. This is what is paying for my living, and it's good money. We are living in a desperate time. People want to protect their jobs.
What you say represents a certain truth, but in my mind, it isn't the entire truth. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this. Yes, big pharma, big this, big... They are always claims that they do not wish to have big tobacco, anything that works against their interests. Class action suits around the world are a testimony to this. Okay? However, if indeed beyond the research that ended up with the animal testing at that phase of the research, in the absence of direct evidence of the harm, because we're talking harm here, that this will directly cause on human beings, our discussion and argument somehow will run out of steam, because there has to be evidence.
But you need precaution. Let's have precaution
No.
for doubt.
I'm not arguing about that. I am simply saying that in the absence of the evidence, because somewhere along the line, even people who are not related to big pharma or big food producers, if there's a prevalence of ailments in a particular region, let's say, for instance, we in Kenya right now are having serious issues with non-communicable diseases, and the regions of the country where we see a higher prevalence. Just like we saw a higher prevalence of HIV in certain parts of the country. So researchers in this field will go and ask that question, because that's what research does. It seeks to find a response to a question that is bothering people. Why is this happening? Okay? Now, we have not been a country that has been dominated, or there's been a high existence of GMO foods, at least not that I know of. And yet, we have a problem with non-communicable diseases. Now, if GMO is introduced purely from a medical scientific perspective, one will be able to see whether there's a direct correspondence. Now, I'm not saying we wait until we see these things. I'm simply saying that when you argue for caution, there has to be more than just the argument for caution.
Because
yes, there has to be a because. And there are those who argue about the benefits of GMO as well. And the argument also makes sense. The caution makes sense. But the substance that would make the caution more potent, is what we often lack when we listen to this discussion.
And that's why we are saying the government should bring back a moratorium, even if it's 10 years, and fund local research. Researchers out there have done research, but not on humans. Mostly you hear like there's a professor from Australia called Judy Kaman who fed pigs, and pigs have almost 90%. Their stomachs are almost similar to human beings.
Very similar.
Very similar.
It's amazing. We are like pigs.
So I didn't see you missing out on that.
So when they were fed on the GM, soya and maize, their stomachs had developed, inflammation. Inflammation is a sign of something. So there's a challenge because not much has been done on human testing. And if you look at, for example, medicine, those who do medicine, if they want to introduce a drug, it takes almost 8 years before they finally release that drug to the market. They do clinical trials and all that. But let me take you back to your proverb this morning.
You are listening, huh?
Old ways and new friends ought not to be disbanded. And by bringing genetically engineered crops into our market, and the fact that we have smallholder farmers, we run the risk of losing our biodiverse, our local varieties. And going back is going to be very difficult for our communities. And let's question ourselves, why is Europe and even the US running back to the organic foods? If you go to Europe and the US, those are expensive products. It's the poor who eat these genetically engineered crops because they understand there are questions on this product. We are better off feeding on our on organically grown crops because the fact that GMOs are linked to increased use of these toxic pesticides. We already have the challenge, like he said, of the NCDs, the non-communicable diseases, but they're going to go higher with us running towards embracing GMOs. Yet we can bring back, even if it's a 10-year moratorium, and fund local research. Yeah. Because also our scientists are constrained. Government does not give them money.
Let's take a break. This conversation about GMO has been in this country for what now, 20 years, right? Like properly. Since that time when the government was having this conversation, like let's go back into 15 years. 15. At the point when the National Biosafety Authority was being established and the conversations around it and the push and pull around it. So you'll tell us, since then, what has taken place, right, in this country up to this point. And then we can then hop on from there. It is 24 minutes to 10. And Maina is the National Coordinator at the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. We are talking about food safety versus food security. Is it worth sacrificing one for the other, or can they both go together? Time for that break. We'll be back shortly. Good morning. This is what the CS for Trade said with regards to importation of GMO.
We have so many things that can kill us in this country. Being in this country, you are a candidate for death. And because there's so many things competing for death, there's nothing wrong with adding GMO to that list. That is why we have deliberately decided to allow GMOs into this country. And the second thing is, until we are satisfied that we have enough maize in this country, our staple food, tomorrow I am signing a gazette notice to allow for importation of up to 10 million bags of maize, duty-free, for the next 6 months until we achieve food security. Because that is our cardinal responsibility as government.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Conversation continues with Ann Maina, the National Coordinator at the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. Ann, what is the difference, again, between GMO and hybrid seeds? You said all GMOs are hybrid, but not all hybrids are GMO.
Okay, GMOs, as I told you, crosses a species barrier. So when you cross maybe maize with a BT variety, which is found in the soil, those do not sexually cross to produce. Yeah? But hybrid,
a maize seed with soil.
What you do with hybrids, you cross two same species. Like you want a maize that's producing bigger cobs. So you cross one that is a bit, maybe you like it because of its height, and you cross one for its productivity, and you get a pure breed. You don't cross the species barrier. It's maize, beans, potato. But with GMO, it's potato
Soil.
and pig. Something like that. You're crossing. They do not naturally
You get
cross.
pie. Shepherd's pie. My
Yes.
goodness.
Potato and pig.
Yes.
What's your association stand on hybrid seeds? Are you okay with hybrid?
We're okay with hybrids. Yes,
Why?
we're okay. Because hybrids do not cross the species barrier, and they are produced to increase productivity. The only thing that you find a bit negative about hybrids, unlike local varieties, farmer managed seed systems, is that you cannot keep on growing a hybrid. You have to go to the shop every season, because
So you plant once.
harvest,
You've got to go and buy.
got and buy.
And GMO.
GMO also like that. It's also a hybrid. All GMOs are hybrids.
So essentially, if I plant a GMO maize seed, once I harvest, I can't use.
Can't keep in store.
I
what you
can't keep in
for
store what
next
I've
season.
harvested for
plant
seed
next-
If
for
you
next
grow
season.
it will not produce. Even hybrid, you can grow it, but the productivity will not be as good as the first parent family, the first family.
But that also happens with the just ordinary maize. I mean, yes,
The traditional one.
Yeah, the reason why the hybrids now became what they were, because if you use the same maize from the same plant, from the same harvest over time, the productivity goes down. It doesn't go up really.
No, you have to apply some science and technology for the local varieties, and we are working with farmers and supporting them to have farmer managed seed systems. In fact, farmer community seed learning centers. They're not seed banks. Seed bank is illegal for a farmer, so it's a community seed learning facility, and we take them through a process to identify the right seed, because even with hybrids, there are farmers who are trained by the companies to produce for them seed. So like, let me give an example. In my small kashamba, if I want to identify the right seed, the first that sprouts, if it's maize, I mark
That is the one.
No, I'll mark it,
Okay.
maybe with a red string. Then the first that tassels, I mark again. The one which has the biggest cob, I mark again. The one that has three, I mark that
Produces
as
3 cobs.
No. The one that has 3 strings, I've marked 3 strings
okay.
from germination to tasseling
Or if
to
one
the cob.
has
Oh,
was
That
the
one
first.
is the best variety for me.
Okay.
And even when I shell it, I do not like hit it with a stick the way we do when you have a lot.
It's the best child.
I take care of
Treat
it.
this child better
and
than
I
the
choose
others.
it and I keep it well.
Right.
And that's something that we are reviving, that system in the villages. It's very common among
For you
the
to
older
identify
ladies.
which one works better.
Identification and conservation, and there you can be able. But you see now, with the advent of hybrids and modernization, a lot of our communities have lost such kind of.
Yeah, you don't have time.
They don't have time, but you find especially the older women. If you want to do this, you start with the older women and bring the others on board, and that's how you are able to realize that. Even the other local varieties.
Yeah.
Let me give an example. There's a community in the Butula area in Busia County we have been working with, and have supported the farmers even to revive a community seed bank. And one of the challenges in the early 2000s, this community faced the biggest challenge of HIV/AIDS. And the women came and said, for those that we're taking care of that are infected by HIV, they need to eat well. And we cannot afford by feeding them. We cannot manage feeding them sukuma wiki and cabbage. Let's bring back our local vegetables, kienyeji vegetables. And they started collecting those vegetables. And it grew. And they started even bringing back their millets and their sorghums. Now they have so much. The community there is producing seed. They are able to sell. What was very interesting is the other day, one of the community members told me, I supply millet and sorghum to the local secondary school, and they meal this for uji for their children.
Beautiful story.
Nutrition, very high. And they have been able to pick back on their seeds. We even took them, these farmers, as far back as 2017, to India. And India is the home of diversity. They have so much variety. And they learned there, and this has really spearheaded them, and they are really... very focused, and now they are very proud of their products.
So the idea here is that this community has gone back to the traditional varieties, the
Yes.
traditional foods.
Yes.
Not necessarily that the new current varieties, that they're producing them better.
No, but also the older varieties are more resilient.
All
You
right.
diversify for nutrition. And I found out that the interesting aspect that the local school does not cook uji for unga ya mahindi. They make it with millet and sorghum, which is nutritionally dense for the children. It's better.
It's better.
Yes, so the amounts, because one of the other challenges that the amounts, because now, like when you go to areas like Tharaka, the farmers say that you see the challenge with the millet and the sorghum. The children now go to school. It's not the olden days where they would stick there with the, what do you call it, and hit the birds.
Sling.
It's called a sling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sling.
I almost used the Sheng word, then I decided to...
Sheng, what is good? What is it called in Sheng?
Was it called fair?
Yeah.
Yes, it's called fair.
No, fair is...
Fair.
The other one you do
Fair
like
is
this.
a catapult.
It's a catapult,
Ah, you are in touch. What was the sling called? Eric should know it.
Me, I only know what it's called in my native language.
That
Tell
is the
us.
Sheng word.
Is that Sheng word?
That's the Sheng word.
Tell us.
Rujo Rujo.
We have to confirm that.
Let me ask then the question, which just off of what you're saying, this particular community in Butula that decided, let's actually go organic and let's look at our traditional varieties and grow them, understanding how to grow them better. Question, a layman's question. How possible is it for a genetically engineered crop to physically influence genetics in another plant? So if a neighboring village took GMO and started planting GMO stuff, would it affect the crops in these Butula women's farms?
Okay, but it has to be the same species. So,
See, I thought GMO
my
is
lady,
pigs, cows, everything.
no. I'm growing GMO maize.
Okay.
My neighbor is growing organic. I have half an acre. He has 1 acre.
Yeah.
There's gene drift. It moves from this side. You see now, it doesn't cross from potato to maize. It's same species. And the main products in the market, maize, cotton, canola, soya. Yeah, cassava now has been introduced. But one of the issues that we've raised about this cassava, by just controlling and maintaining phytosanitary standards, you can be able to control the cassava brown streak and the cassava mosaic diseases. But you're running ahead to produce
We'll
a GMO.
come back into that.
Yeah.
So this one has kawaida maize. Let's even say the kawaida hybrid maize that's been allowed in the country for the last many years.
Yeah.
Then next year, in the next planting season, farmer X neighbor comes with GMO.
So
What's
I
gonna
plant
happen?
my kawaida maize. He's planting GMOs.
Yes.
The maize, there's no big space between us.
No,
See,
we are
the shamba
neighbors.
is very small.
In fact, we are brothers.
So it's crossing.
Yes.
There's cross-pollination. So my local organic variety or the local variety gets contaminated. Eventually, I will lose my local species because it when they cross, the male from there comes and crosses my female. There's a change there. And let me give an example. There was
and
a
what's the
farmer-
effect of that?
The effect that I will lose my local varieties and going back to them is very difficult. Let me give an example. There's a farmer in Canada who passed on about 2 years ago called Percy Smizer. He was growing conventional canola. Big farm. His neighbor was growing GMO canola. There was cross-pollination. One of the companies that was selling the GM canola came and tested his. And one of the controversial bits in our seed law is that there's a seed inspector, which has not been done yet. So they came and tested. And they found that because of cross-pollination, he had the GM variety in his farm. And he was sued millions of Canadian dollars because he was told, you are taking our
You have not
technology.
bought our-
You have not bought our technology and you have it in your farm. He was sued. He actually almost went bankrupt.
Unbeknownst to him that this had happened.
Yes, because of cross-pollination. Right. He
Can
had
it happen the other way around?
the other way around.
Yeah, from hybrid to GMO.
Or conventional to
Yeah,
GMO.
conventional to GMO. That you can actually go to this person who
But
has
you know, most of
GMO
the
and
organic is
sue them.
actually free. It's proprietary free. Because one of the challenges is who owns the intellectual property.
But the thing is, it can affect either way.
It can affect either way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, currently, without GMO in the country, you have the conventional.
There's a conventional variety. There are those who
And
doing,
then there's a hybrid.
Yes.
So
The conventional is hybrid.
Is
actually.
hybrid, is-
Yes, and you can have those who are practicing organic.
the organic.
Yeah.
So same scenario. Neighbor A, neighbor B. One with organic, the other one with hybrid. Can that effect happen?
Yes, it can also happen.
Okay.
Yes.
Have we seen any negative effect of that happening? Like, this one, because of you came with your hybrid, you've then affected my productivity, or because you've been an old person with your old seeds, you've affected my productivity on this side.
No, we have not seen any of that happening. Because,
Health-wise?
health-wise, I cannot prove.
Okay.
I have not seen that research. But someone accusing the other one, you have accessed my technology without paying for it. No.
Not yet.
How did that story end?
He was sued. He almost went bankrupt, and then he was supported. Again, he appealed. Eventually, he won the case. But the impact, he was an old man in his 70s and had been growing his conventional variety for many years. Eventually, he won, but the effect was so much. He died like 2 years ago, this corona period. But that's one example of he who owns the seed can come to you and tell you, Eric, you seem to have my gene without paying for it. You have to pay for it. Can you imagine that happening in Kenya?
I
Can that be cured by changing the law?
Yes, we can change the seed law. In fact, one of our partners, Greenpeace Africa, has gone to court urging the government to revise the Seed Act, especially to remove those aspects of the seed law where farmers can be sued. But one of the things that we feel is very important also is the government to recognize farmers as breeders, because currently in Kenya, a farmer is not considered a breeder. And that's why when I told you we have those community seed learning centers.
You can't call it a
them
seed bank.
Yes, you can be sued for that. Who are you to save seed? It's a community seed learning center. So the government also needs to recognize these farmers. They have fed us for hundreds of years in Kenya. So why are you just linking the issue of having developing a seed and you know what happens? A lot of the university masters or PhD students, they go to the farmers, they are able to develop proper protocols and register their seed, and you lose control.
Okay. I mean, looking at this conversation, then what does that mean in terms of what, we're hearing? We know probably in a few days or so, this GMO, at least for the maize, is going to be here. What does that mean going forward? From your perspective and from what you've told us this morning, what does it mean then for consumerism in the country now? Consumption?
The GMO maize coming in duty-free is going to be cheaper. Our farmers in the...
And will people know what they're purchasing? Sorry?
No, it has to be labeled. You cannot tell GM just looking at it, this is GM, this is conventional. It's not possible. You have to do testing. We know the National Biosafety Authority has some labeling regulations. Unfortunately, the capacity is also limited. There could also be a possibility that it can get into the market without people realizing it's GM. Number two, it's going to be cheaper. Our farmers in the Rift Valley region are currently harvesting. The government has recognized that I was listening to the news this morning that farmers are holding about 20 million bags. And the government was urging them to release this maize. You can imagine when the GM maize gets in and it's cheaper, and the farmers, the cost of production was higher because fertilizer was more expensive. Where are they going to sell their maize? We have often argued as a network that also the issue of GMO, apart from the socioeconomic concerns, is about trade. And you can see that it took just less than a month that the government is saying, okay, we want to open up the market for duty-free GMO maize to come into the country. Previously, we asked for duty-free non-GMO maize. Why don't they consider that? Number two, let me give an example of Zambia. A few years back, over 10 years back, when they had Levi Mwanawasa as the president, and he was under a lot of pressure. The country was going through hunger, and he was under pressure from many of these countries, and they were asking him, are you going to let your people die because you're saying no to GMO? And he made a very Solomonic decision and said, my people will not die. What we will do, because my people might save some of this seed and say they are going to plant it, bring in that maize milled. Bring it milled.
Bring it as unga.
Kama unga. Yeah, because they were in a desperate situation. He's being told the maize is at the high seas. The Zambians are dying. You're not being very realistic. And he said, bring the maize milled, so that my people don't plant that maize, and we have cross-pollination and the effect that it will have on the environment.
Did it come milled?
Yeah, it came milled.
So we should tell.
Oh wow!
No, but
Of course, I'm going there.
but we want non-GM maize.
You don't want even milled. You don't want
Milled.
unga.
No, I want
Otherwise,
it milled,
you
but
want
non-GM. Bring it non-GM. Unfortunately, it seems there are ships just lying on just outside our coast.
One has docked.
It has docked already. Yes, my friend was here and told you at Amba the other day in October that you wait, you will see, and it has come to
Don't
pass.
worry, it's not the only ship. We even have ships that have sugar. So it's not as though.
Mercury led.
Yeah, I mean it's
They're waiting to dock. Just
Yes.
waiting for courier to put a signature.
Yes.
When you say trade, you are spot on. But then you see, the world we live in, where there's big everything, there are always business interests and business concerns. You see, alcohol, in my opinion, poses a much, much bigger problem than some of these things we talk about. And the health issues that alcohol brings about, maybe it's because we've researched on it for the longest time, is even greater than what we find with, say, what we call opioids. But yet, it is sold freely, people can buy it freely, people can drink it freely. What am I saying? I'm saying the discussion around GMOs, yes, it makes perfect sense. But just like the companies that deal in GMO have an interest, those who mitigate against it also have an interest. Now, is the interest that of the public, or is it just interest because this is the position they have taken and they have reasons why they've taken that position?
It's also for the public and our communities. I think if I ask you if you are given a choice to eat organic and GM, you will make
Do they taste different?
They say organic is more tasty.
Then I would
And you'll go for the
nutritious.
tasty one.
Very nutritious.
Because of the taste.
It's like ugali. Ugali, you're given, you take the red variety from your village, you mill it, you eat that ugali, is more nutritious, is more filling. And like the other one, which they say is sugar, like glucose. Let me not mention brands.
The very, very white one.
The white one.
Grade one, sifted, grade one.
All glucose.
Anne, thank you very much for joining us. It's been
Thank
an
you, it was
interesting
a pleasure.
conversation. Yep, and we'll invite you again.
Thank you.